The sun had barely risen, but the Wilsons' yard already buzzed with frantic activity. Bouquets of flowers lined the patio, awaiting the start of Caitlin and Ethan's long-awaited wedding. Sarah, the mother of the bride, frantically directed a team of caterers, unsure if they'd finish in time. Suddenly, a sleek black SUV pulled up the driveway. The driver's side door flew open, and a well-coiffed woman in a crisp pantsuit stormed towards the scene, her eyes narrowed in displeasure. "What on earth is going on here?" Karen, the HOA president, demanded. "This is a clear violation of our noise ordinance. And those flowers, they're blocking the sidewalk. This is unacceptable." Sarah hurried over, her face etched with worry. "Karen, I'm so sorry. We're just trying to get everything ready for Caitlin's wedding. It's only for today, I promise." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "One day? That's what they all say. Rules are rules, Sarah. You're disrupting the neighborhood." The caterers paused, glancing nervously between the two women. Caitlin emerged from the house, her eyes widening at the confrontation unfolding before her. "Karen, please," Caitlin pleaded. "It's just for a few hours. We'll have everything cleaned up by tonight, I swear." Karen's gaze swept over the scene, her expression unyielding. "I'm afraid I can't make any exceptions. This is a serious breach of our HOA guidelines." Sarah reached out, her voice laced with desperation. "Karen, it's my daughter's wedding day. Can't you make an exception, just this once?" But Karen shook her head, unmoved. "The rules are in place for a reason, Sarah. I'm sorry, but I have no choice." She turned on her heel and strode back to her SUV, leaving the Wilsons in stunned silence. Caitlin felt the color drain from her face as she watched Karen drive away. "Mom, what are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter, her own eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know." The caterers stood awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. The once joyous preparations had been thrown into chaos, and the Wilsons faced an impossible decision: defy the HOA and risk severe penalties, or cancel Caitlin's dream wedding. The Wilsons huddled together, the weight of Karen's ultimatum bearing down on them. Caitlin's eyes were rimmed with red, her hands trembling as she grasped her mother's sleeve. "Mom, we can't just cancel the wedding," she pleaded. "Ethan and I have been planning this for 2 years. All our family and friends are coming." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, honey. But you heard Karen. She won't make an exception. We could be fined, or even have the HOA take legal action against us." Ethan, who had been silently observing the exchange, stepped forward. "There has to be something we can do. We can't just let Karen ruin our special day." The caterers shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to proceed. One of them, a young man with a kind face, spoke up. "Maybe there's a way we can work around the rules. I mean, it's just for a few hours, right?" Sarah turned to him, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "What do you mean?" The caterer shrugged. "Well, maybe we could keep the noise down, move the flowers out of the way, and try to be as discreet as possible. That way, we wouldn't be technically breaking any rules." Caitlin's face lit up. "Yes, that could work. And if we move everything inside the house, the HOA won't even know what's going on." Sarah hesitated, her brow furrowed. "I don't know, you two." Karen seemed pretty adamant about the rules. "What if she finds out?" Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We have to try, Mrs. Wilson. This is the only way we can make Caitlin's dream come true." The caterers nodded in agreement, their expressions determined. Caitlin looked at her mother, her eyes pleading. "Please, Mom. Let's at least try." After a long moment, Sarah sighed and nodded. "All right, let's do it. But we have to be really careful, okay?" The group sprang into action, quickly moving the flowers and other decorations into the house. The caterers worked quietly, their movements efficient and coordinated. Caitlin and Ethan watched, their hearts filled with cautious optimism. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the Wilsons' yard transformed into a serene, unassuming space. A stark contrast to the bustling preparations that had taken place just moments before. The stage was set for Caitlin and Ethan's wedding, but the looming threat of Karen's wrath hung in the air, casting a shadow over the day's celebrations. The wedding ceremony unfolded with a sense of hushed anticipation. Caitlin and Ethan exchanged vows in the Wilson family's living room, their voices soft but full of emotion. The small gathering of family and friends watched with rapt attention, their expressions a mix of joy and concern. As the couple shared their first kiss as husband and wife, a sudden knock at the door shattered the intimate moment. Caitlin's heart leaped into her throat as Sarah hurried to answer it, her face etched with worry. Standing on the porch was Karen, her lips pursed in a disapproving frown. "I thought I made myself quite clear this morning," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Sarah swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "Karen, please, we're just having a small private ceremony. There's no need to cause a scene." Karen's eyes narrowed as she pushed past Sarah, striding into the living room. A private ceremony. In clear violation of our HOA regulations. The guests fell silent, their faces reflecting a mix of discomfort and fear. Caitlin gripped Ethan's hand, her knuckles turning white. "Karen, it's just for a few hours," Caitlin pleaded. "We'll have everything cleaned up by tonight, I promise." But Karen's expression remained uncompromising. "I'm afraid I can't make any exceptions, Caitlin. The rules are in place for a reason." She turned to the guests, her gaze sweeping over them. "All of you need to leave immediately. This event is unauthorized and will not be tolerated." The room erupted into a cacophony of protests and objections, but Karen held up a hand, silencing them. "If you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to call the police and have you all removed." Caitlin felt her heart sink as she watched her guests begin to gather their belongings, their faces etched with disappointment and anger. Ethan pulled her close, his arms offering a small measure of comfort. "We can't let her do this, Caitlin," he whispered. "This is our wedding day. We have to stand up to her." Caitlin nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "You're right. We've worked too hard to let Karen ruin everything." As the guests reluctantly filed out, Caitlin stepped forward, her chin held high. "Karen, you can't do this. This is our wedding day, and we're not going to let you take that away from us." Karen's expression hardened. "I'm afraid I have no choice, Caitlin. The rules are clear, and I must enforce them." The tension in the room was palpable as the two women faced off, their conflict escalating with each passing moment. The Wilsons' dream wedding had been thrown into chaos, and the consequences of their defiance were yet to be determined. The standoff between Caitlin and Karen continued, the air thick with tension. Caitlin's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles turning white with the strain. "Please, Karen, this is the most important day of our lives," Caitlin pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Can't you make an exception, just this once?" Karen's expression remained unyielding. "The rules are in place for a reason, Caitlin. I'm not at liberty to make exceptions, no matter how much it may mean to you." Ethan stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "This is our wedding day, Karen. We've worked hard to make this happen, and we're not going to let you ruin it." Karen's eyes narrowed as she turned her gaze to Ethan. "I understand your frustration, but the rules are the rules. I have a responsibility to uphold them, regardless of the circumstances." Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, finally spoke up. "Karen, is there really no way we can compromise? Surely there must be some way we can make this work." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm afraid not, Sarah. The HOA guidelines are clear, and I have no choice but to enforce them." Caitlin felt a surge of anger rise within her. "So you're just going to ruin the most important day of our lives because of some stupid rules?" Karen's expression hardened. "I'm not ruining anything, Caitlin. I'm simply upholding the standards that all homeowners in this community have agreed to abide by. The guests, who had been quietly observing the exchange, began to murmur their discontent. One of them, a gruff-looking man, stepped forward. "Come on, Karen. It's just for a few hours. Can't you make an exception just this once? We're not causing any real harm here." Karen's gaze swept over the group, her lips curling into a sneer. "I'm afraid that's not how it works. The rules apply to everyone, regardless of the circumstances." Caitlin felt the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She knew that defying Karen would have serious consequences, but the thought of giving up on her dream wedding was too much to bear. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with concern. "Caitlin, maybe we should just call it off. I don't want you to get in trouble with the HOA." Caitlin's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. "No, Ethan. I'm not going to let Karen win. This is our day, and we're going to fight for it." The room fell silent as Caitlin stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Karen's. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine the fate of the Wilsons' wedding. The tension in the room was palpable as Caitlin stared down Karen, her expression unwavering. The other guests watched in tense silence, unsure of how the confrontation would unfold. "Karen, I know the rules are important to you, but this is our wedding day," Caitlin said, her voice firm. "We've worked so hard to make this happen, and we're not going to let you take that away from us." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand that this is a special occasion for you, Caitlin, but the rules are in place for a reason. I have a responsibility to uphold them, regardless of the circumstances." Ethan stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "But can't you at least make an exception, just this once? We're not causing any real harm, and we've already gone to so much trouble to make this happen." Karen's gaze swept over the group, her expression uncompromising. "I'm afraid I can't make any exceptions, Ethan. The rules apply to everyone equally, and I won't compromise on that." Caitlin felt a surge of frustration rise within her. "So you're just going to ruin the most important day of our lives because of some stupid rules?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "I'm not ruining anything, Caitlin. I'm simply doing my job as the HOA president to enforce the guidelines that we all agreed to follow." Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, stepped forward. "Karen, is there really no way we can work something out? Surely there must be some compromise we can reach." Karen shook her head, her expression unwavering. "I'm afraid not, Sarah. The rules are clear, and I have no choice but to enforce them." The guests began to murmur their discontent, with several of them voicing their frustration at Karen's unyielding stance. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of lowing cows. Everyone turned in shock as a herd of cows came barreling into the living room, their hooves thundering across the hardwood floors. Caitlin and Ethan stared in disbelief as the cows began to trample the wedding decorations, sending flowers and candles flying in all directions. Karen's eyes widened in horror as she frantically tried to shoo the animals out of the house. In the chaos, Caitlin and Ethan exchanged a knowing glance, a mischievous smile playing on their lips. It seemed that their unexpected balding guests had taken matters into their own hands, or hooves, as it were. As the cows continued to wreak havoc, the Wilsons and their guests watched in stunned silence, unsure of whether to laugh or cry at the unexpected turn of events. The Wilson home had descended into absolute pandemonium as the herd of cows trampled through the living room, their hooves sending flowers and decorations flying in all directions. Karen, her normally composed demeanor shattered, frantically tried to herd the animals out of the house, her shrill cries only adding to the cacophony. Caitlin and Ethan stood in the midst of the chaos, their eyes wide with disbelief. Glancing at each other, they couldn't help but let out a nervous laugh at the unexpected turn of events. "I can't believe this is happening," Caitlin whispered to Ethan, her voice tinged with a hint of giddiness. Ethan squeezed her hand, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. I have to admit, this is not exactly how I pictured our wedding day going. As the cows continued to wreak havoc, the other guests watched the scene unfold with a mix of shock and amusement. Some even began to chuckle, unable to contain their laughter at the sheer absurdity of the situation. Karen, her face flushed with fury, turned to the Wilsons, her finger pointed accusingly. "This is your doing, isn't it?" She spat. "You orchestrated this entire debacle to undermine me." Caitlin raised her hands in a placating gesture, trying to suppress her grin. "No, Karen, I swear we had nothing to do with this. It's just an unexpected development." Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "I don't believe you for a second. This is a clear violation of the HOA rules, and I won't stand for it." Before Caitlin could respond, a loud crash came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of shattering glass. The guests instinctively ducked as one of the cows came barreling through the doorway, its tail knocking over a vase filled with water. In the chaos, Ethan suddenly had an idea. Leaning in close to Caitlin, he whispered his plan, his eyes glinting with mischief. Caitlin's eyes widened, and she nodded eagerly. "Let's do it," she said, her voice filled with determination. As Karen continued to berate them, the newlyweds sprung into action, quickly ushering the guests out of the house. Ignoring Karen's protests, they led the cows outside, where they began to corral the animals onto a small trailer parked in the driveway. The guests watched in awe as Caitlin and Ethan expertly handled the cows, their movements fluid and efficient. Karen, her face twisted with indignation, could only stand by and watch as her attempts to control the situation were foiled. Once the last cow was loaded onto the trailer, Caitlin and Ethan turned to the guests, their faces beaming with triumph. "Well, I guess the cows took care of the wedding cleanup for us," Ethan quipped, eliciting a round of laughter from the group. As the trailer pulled away, Karen stood alone in the driveway, her fists clenched in frustration. The Wilsons had found an unexpected solution to her HOA rules, and she knew she had been bested, at least for now. The Wilsons and their guests gathered outside, still reeling from the unexpected bovine invasion. Caitlin and Ethan stood hand in hand, their faces alight with a mix of relief and amusement. "I can't believe that actually worked," Caitlin said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Ethan chuckled, pulling her closer. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure it would, but I'm glad it did." The guests erupted into laughter, the tension of the earlier confrontation finally dissipating. One of the older guests, a kindly-looking woman, approached the newlyweds, her eyes shining with admiration. "You two really showed that Karen who's boss," she said, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I've never seen someone handle a herd of cows with such grace and determination." Caitlin felt a blush creep across her cheeks. "It was all Ethan's idea," she admitted, giving her husband's hand a gentle squeeze. Ethan shrugged, a sheepish grin on his face. "I just wanted to find a way to help you have the wedding you deserve, Caitlin. I know how important it was to you." The guests murmured their agreement, nodding approvingly at Ethan's thoughtfulness. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the celebrations. "This is completely unacceptable," Karen shouted, her face twisted with rage as she stormed towards the group. "You've all violated the HOA rules, and there will be consequences." The guests fell silent, their expressions turning to ones of concern. Caitlin stepped forward, her chin held high. "Karen, we didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice calm and measured. "We were just trying to have our wedding, and the cows showed up on their own." Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't care how it happened, Caitlin. The fact remains that you've disrupted the neighborhood, caused property damage, and completely disregarded the rules we all agreed to follow." Ethan moved to stand beside his wife, his expression resolute. "Look, Karen, we're sorry for the mess, but this is our wedding day. Shouldn't that count for something?" Karen's gaze swept over the group, her expression unrelenting. "The rules are the rules, Ethan. I'm afraid I have no choice but to pursue legal action against you and your family." The guests erupted into a chorus of protests, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. Caitlin felt her heart sink, the weight of Karen's ultimatum bearing down on her. As the confrontation escalated, the Wilsons realized that their struggle with the HOA president was far from over. The battle lines had been drawn, and the stakes had never been higher. The Wilsons and their guests stood in stunned silence as Karen's threat of legal action hung in the air. Caitlin felt a lump rise in her throat, her heart racing with a mix of fear and defiance. "Karen, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Can't we find some way to resolve this? We didn't mean for any of this to happen." Karen's expression remained unwavering, her eyes cold and unyielding. "I'm afraid the damage has already been done, Caitlin. The HOA guidelines are clear, and you've blatantly disregarded them." Ethan stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "But this is our wedding day, Karen. Shouldn't that count for something? We've worked so hard to make this happen, and you're trying to take that away from us." Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "I'm afraid your personal desires don't supersede the rules of this community, Ethan. The HOA is responsible for maintaining order and property values, and I won't let your reckless actions jeopardize that." The guests erupted into a chorus of protests, their voices rising in anger and frustration. One of the younger guests, a fiery-eyed woman, stepped forward, her fists clenched. "This is completely ridiculous," she shouted. "You're just a power-hungry tyrant who gets off on ruining people's lives. Can't you see how much this means to Caitlin and Ethan?" Karen's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "I understand your frustration, but the rules are in place for a reason. I have a responsibility to uphold them, no matter how unpopular it may be." Caitlin felt her eyes sting with tears as she watched the confrontation unfold. She had never imagined that her wedding day would be marred by such bitter conflict, and the weight of it all was threatening to overwhelm her. Ethan, sensing her distress, pulled her close, his arms offering a comforting embrace. "Don't worry, Caitlin," he whispered. "We're not going to let Karen ruin this for us. We'll fight this, no matter what it takes." Caitlin nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right, Ethan. We've come too far to let her win. We have to stand up to her, for ourselves and for everyone else she's bullied." The guests, sensing the Wilsons' newfound determination, rallied around them, their expressions filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they faced off against Karen, their collective voice rising in a defiant chorus. As the sun began to set, the Wilsons and their supporters stood their ground, unwilling to back down in the face of Karen's unyielding demands. The battle lines had been drawn, and the future of the wedding, and the Wilsons' home, hung in the balance.